If you were to summarize your whole life, everything will fall into one of these three categories. Your relationships with people, how you manage that, how you spend your time, how you manage that, and how you manage your money. And although they might seem disjointed, what he's going to show is that if you don't find peace in all three of these areas of your lives, the common denominator, most likely, is that there's some issue of pride there. That's what he's getting at. That the problem for all of us, in other words, is that pride is the main barrier between knowing God's word and applying God's word. Because again, wisdom is not just knowing God's word. Wisdom is to apply God's word and to see your life through his perspective. And so how come we don't apply everything that we know to be true? Well, it's a problem of pride. And that is really the opposite picture of God's wisdom. God's wisdom produces humility and peace, whereas not living by God's wisdom produces chaos and disorder, which is driven by pride. So the main point for today is that pride is the main reason why we don't apply God's wisdom in our lives. And this comes out in three areas: your relationships, your time, or your money. And maybe for some of us that have a big pride problem like me, it comes out in all three areas, right? It's like, these are all the problems still for me, right? So that's what James is really going to highlight today. This is, in a lot of ways, probably the most difficult part of the letter, because he's been building up to this point. You know, he's kind of laying the foundation. He addresses people who are suffering. He gives them hope. He tells them to endure. You know, he goes through all the examples of what it means to look like to live by wisdom, which is living faith. And he's gone through this teaching analysis in James chapter 2. James chapter 3, he paints a beautiful picture of God's wisdom. But it's here in chapter 4 where he gets really confrontational now. It's here where he says, okay, now that I set the stage for you, let me dig into your life. And all of us here are going to have a problem in one of these three areas, if not more. And so he starts off by talking about our relationships, fighting. Look at verse 1. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? Every fight that you have ever been in, and every fight that you will ever be in, comes down to this one issue: your passion. Now, the solution is he's not saying to be passionless people, like to not care. Because first of all, that's not possible. You can act like you don't care, but all of us will care about something. We are all created to be passionate people or passionate beings. We are all created to have a love for something or obsession about something. And the word passion is the word we get hedonism. So the idea is that you have a deep desire for something. So the problem is not that we have a deep desire for something. The problem is, what do we have a deep desire for? It goes back to the idea of temptation in James chapter 1. What is that deep desire that drives your actions, right? The problem is not get rid of your desires, because that's not possible. But don't let that desire become a what? Epi-desire, right? Don't let your love for your family become an epi-desire. Don't let your love for a job become the epi-desire. And that's the same way with fighting. It's when these epi-desires are starting to come out, when these passions become intensified to the point where you start to hurt other people. Now let's think about this a little more. If you have a strong desire for stability, and you feel like your job is not paying you enough to feel stable, and you feel like the main person that's getting in between you and that stability and that raise is your boss, what's that going to create between you and your boss? Whether that boss is really the one responsible or not, you're going to have an internal passion to fight against the boss who's getting in the way of what you really want. And so what we start to see is that our fights are not really about the people we're fighting, it's what they're in the way of in terms of our desire. Think about the last fight. You fought with that person because they were in the way of something you wanted, deep down. You didn't get the respect that you think you deserve from that person, so you lash out. You didn't get the security, you didn't get the value, you didn't get the recognition, you didn't get the whatever the blank is of whatever you desire. And so eventually what happens is that you start to blame that person for being the reason why you don't feel, quote unquote, at peace. So you start to have a conflict with that person. But remember how chapter 3 just ended. Where do you get peace from? It's not what you are desiring, it's what? God's wisdom. Do you see how the solution there? See, instead of trusting that God's wisdom will give you peace, you want peace from this, whatever that is. Higher salary, better house, better marriage, better kids, whatever, right? You think that will give you peace, and so you start to see all the hurdles that gets in the way of it, and typically there are people that get in the way of what we want. At least that's what we think. And so here's what we have to understand. The problem James is getting at with relationship is not just desires or passions, it's frustrated desires. Because think about it this way. If you had a desire for food and you're able to go and buy food and you ate dinner on the way to this class, you wouldn't have a frustrated desire, so you're not going to get in a fight with anybody. Because you had a desire, you got it, and you satisfy it. But when will a fight happen? You have a desire because you're really hungry, you get in line, and somebody cuts in front of you. Or the server takes 1 hour to serve you food that should take. That's when the fight happens. Because that desire is now frustrated. So what we have to realize is every fight comes down to not just our desires, but what's frustrating that desire. I'm not getting it as soon as I want. Or this person's preventing. Or do you see how we start to see our lives this way? It's a frustrated desire. And so you want something so badly that you don't think about how you're treating other people in the process of satisfying that desire. And when people are not satisfying that desire at the rate that you want, and you get frustrated with them, then you start to attack them. That's at the root of every fight, by the way. Every single fight, whether it's in the legal courts, whether it's in your company, whether it's in the church, whether it's in your marriage, that's the root of every fight, James says. Frustrated desires. How many of you guys are married here? Have you ever been frustrated? Today, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Every single fight, it starts with something small, but it's a frustration. And what happens to that frustration, though? If it doesn't get resolved, it just grows. You keep it in, because, Asians, we don't like to express, so I'll just let it go this time. But you keep a record. All right, number 20, that's it. And you start to explode on something unrelated, but really what was happening? You built up this frustration that caused an explosion, which leads to fights. Do you see how that happens? But what that fight could have been prevented, according to James, if you dealt with that frustrated desire and had a different perspective about that desire. And so here's a question. What kind of perspective are we to have about our frustrated desires? Look at verse 2. He says, you desire, do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. So you might be thinking, this sounds really extreme. He's talking about murder, he's talking about coveting, but here's two sides of the same coin. Murder and coveting are related to desires. Let me explain how. When a person gets in the way of what you want to get rid of that hurdle by hurting them, getting rid of them, firing them, divorcing them, whatever it is. And that is the same desire that leads to murder, whether you murder them or not. Do you see what I'm saying? The desire of murder is to get rid of the person in the way of my desire. How's coveting related to desire? It's not that that person now is in the way of what you desire. They have what you desire. They have the life that you want, so you're jealous of it. They have the spouse that you want, so you try to take that spouse. They have do you see what I'm saying? So people either get in the way of what you desire, or they have what you desire, according to James. So you either have the desire that can lead to violence or murder, or you have the desire of jealousy that can lead to coveting and resentment. That's where all fights come from.